The first thing I noticed was the sound of her chewing. Not loud, not exaggerated, just one present, wet enough to exist in the silence between us. I sat across from her at the kitchen island with my coffee cooling between both hands, watching the steam unravel upward in thin, twisting ribbons while she scrolled through her phone and ate avocado toast like I wasn't there. The apartment was dim despite the morning. Rain pressed against the windows in soft gray streaks, muting the skyline outside into something distant and watercolor blurred. The dishwasher hummed low beneath the counter. The refrigerator clicked every few seconds like a patient mechanical heartbeat, and her chewing kept slipping into the spaces between those sounds. I don't know why that was the thing. Not the forgotten good morning. Not the fact she hadn't looked at me once since sitting down. Not even the way she'd automatically moved my work papers aside without asking so she could place her plate there. It was the chewing. Because once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing how completely comfortable she was inside my existence. Like I was furniture. Useful furniture, a countertop, a lamp. Something already owned. She laughed softly at something on her phone. A small breath through her nose. Not shared. Not offered. Just existing beside me. I stared at the side of her face. Her hair was still damp from the shower, darker at the ends. One strand stuck to the side of her neck. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and knew she didn't need to care anymore. That thought landed strangely deep inside me. Didn't need to care anymore. My fingers tightened around the mug. Who's funny? I asked. The question came out lighter than I expected. Almost casual. She kept scrolling. The text. Oh, another tiny laugh. Just Melissa. I waited. Nothing else came. I nodded slowly like that answered something. Outside, a siren dragged through the rain somewhere below the apartment tower. Faint, distant, the city sounding exhausted before noon. Emily took another bite. Growl, chew, swallow, growl. I watched her thumb moving against the screen with unconscious efficiency and felt something cold moving carefully through my chest. Not anger. Anger was cleaner. This felt more like erosion. Like standing in the same place for years while invisible water slowly removed pieces of you grain by grain until one day you looked down and realized you had become hollow without ever hearing the collapse happen. You're staring, she said finally, still not looking up. I blinked. Sorry, it's weird. That almost made me laugh. Weird. After 9 years together, my face looking at hers had become weird. I looked down into my coffee. The surface had gone still and black. I could see myself reflected faintly there, warped by the curve of the mug. Eyes tired, shoulders slightly rounded. 38 years old and somehow already carrying the posture of someone apologizing for existing in his own. You forgot your lunch yesterday, I said quietly. Did I? It's still in the fridge. Oh, another scroll. Another bite. I'll take it today, I nodded again. Always nod. Always adjusting myself around her comfort like water around stone. And suddenly I became horribly aware of how much of my life had turned into anticipation. Anticipating her mood. Anticipating interruptions. Anticipating disinterest. Anticipating whether a sentence was worth finishing once I saw the look in her eyes halfway through. I watched her stand and carry her plate to the sink without rinsing it. A small thing. Tiny. Meaningless. But I still waited for the rinse that never came because some pathetic reflex inside me kept believing she might notice the things I usually handle. She picked up her purse from the chair. Hazel. Phone. Lip balm. All right, I'm heading out. No kiss, no pause. Already halfway gone. Then she finally looked at me. Not cruelly. That was the worst part. Cruelty would have at least required focus. This was just automatic. You okay? She asked, like noticing a flicker in a lamp. I opened my mouth, and for one terrifying second I almost told the truth. No. No, I'm disappearing in front of you. No, I think you stopped seeing me years ago and I helped you do it. No, I can feel myself becoming smaller every day inside this marriage, and I don't know how to stop it without destroying everything. But her hand was already on the door handle, already leaning away. So I heard myself say, yeah. Just tired, then she left. The door clicked shut softly behind her, and the apartment immediately felt different. Not emptier, heavier, because now there was no movement to distract from the silence. I sat there for a long time without touching the coffee. Rain crawled down the windows. The dishwasher continued humming. Her plate sat in the sink with smashed avocado smeared across porcelain like something unfinished. And slowly, very slowly, something ugly began unfolding inside me. Not dramatic, not explosive, quiet, a realization so small it almost escaped notice. If I vanished, truly vanished, how long would it take her to understand the difference between missing me and missing what I did for her? The thought made my stomach tighten immediately. I hated myself for thinking it, but once it existed, it stayed, like a crack beneath glass. I stood eventually and walked to the sink, rinsed her plate, loaded it carefully into the dishwasher, wiped the counter, folded the dish towel neatly over the faucet. Then I stopped, because suddenly the motions felt horrifyingly automatic, my body performing maintenance on a life that no longer contained me emotionally. I leaned both hands against the counter and lowered my head. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee grounds and rain-damp air slipping through the old window seal. My chest felt tight, not enough to panic, just enough to make breathing feel deliberate. I closed my eyes, and memories started surfacing without permission. Emily asleep against my shoulder years ago during our first apartment hunt. Emily crying, laughing while we assembled IKEA furniture wrong. Emily pulling me into grocery store aisles just to dance when songs she liked came on overhead. Back when she looked directly at me while talking. Back when my attention felt valuable instead of permanently available. Somewhere along the line, love had stopped being something exchanged and started becoming something extracted. And I didn't know when I allowed that transition to happen. Maybe gradually. Maybe through 1,000 tiny surrenders. You stop correcting small dismissals because you're tired. You stop bringing up hurt because it becomes inconvenient. You stop asking for tenderness because needing it feels embarrassing. Then one day you wake up inside a relationship where your silence has become part of the architecture. Expected, useful, invisible. I opened my eyes and stared at the dark kitchen window over the sink. My reflection looked vague in the glass. Ghosted. I suddenly imagined walking out of this apartment and never returning. Not suicide, not revenge, just absent. A clean removal. Like pulling a thread from fabric to see whether the structure notices strain. The idea terrified me. And beneath the terror, something else. Relief. That frightened me more. At work, I couldn't focus. The office lights were too white, too sharp. Every keyboard click sounded hostile. I sat inside my glass-walled office pretending to review quarterly projections while my mind replayed breakfast in microscopic detail. Her chewing, her scrolling. Your staring, the casualness of it gnawed at me. Not because it was cruel, because it wasn't. Cruelty implies intent. This felt worse. This was neglect through comfort. The kind that grows from absolute certainty the other person will remain. I rubbed my eyes hard. On the other side of the glass wall, people moved through the office carrying coffees and folders and conversation. Fragments of laughter drifted between cubicles. Phones rang intermittently. Life continuing normally. Meanwhile, I felt like I was sitting underwater. My assistant knocked lightly. Daniel, I looked up too slowly. She hesitated. You have the Henderson call in 10, right? You want coffee? No. Thanks, she lingered half a second too long. Concerned. I recognized it immediately because I almost never received it at home anymore. You sure you're okay? There it was again. That question. But from her, it sounded different. Present. I forced a smile. Didn't sleep much, she nodded slowly, unconvinced, then left. The moment the door shut, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Didn't sleep much. Technically true. For months now, sleep had become something thin and unreliable. Emily would fall asleep facing away from me, phone glowing against her cheek long after midnight, while I stared at the dark, listening to the subtle rhythm of her breathing and wondering when intimacy had transformed into proximity. There's a particular loneliness to lying beside someone who no longer reaches for you unconscious. Your body notices before your mind admits it. The absence of accidental touch, the missing weight against your arm, the way someone begins sleeping at the edge of the mattress without discussion. Tiny migration, tiny abandonment. By the time you consciously recognize them, they've already become habit. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Can you grab oat milk on the way home? Nothing else, no heart. No how's your day. No acknowledgement of this morning's strange distance. Just oatmeal. I stared at the message for a long time. Then typed, sure. 3 dots appeared immediately. And vanished, no response. My chest hollowed out a little further. It was absurd. Pathetic even. How much emotional weight could fit inside tiny digital silences. I set the phone face down. Suddenly I couldn't stand being in the office anymore. The walls felt too close. The fluorescent lights too invasive. I stood abruptly and crossed to the window, overlooking the street 17 floors below. Rain still fell steadily. People moved under umbrellas like dark drifting shapes. For one irrational moment, I imagined disappearing into that crowd permanently. No calls, no explanation. Just dissolving. Would Emily panic first? Or would irritation come before panic? What'd she think? Something happened to him, or why isn't he answering? The distinction mattered in a way I hated. Because one came from love. The other came from interrupted convenience. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cold glass. My reflection stared back faintly. And for the first time in years, I had the unbearable sensation that I no longer knew whether my marriage was dying. What? Or whether I had simply died quietly inside it long ago. That night the apartment smelled like garlic and butter. Emily was cooking when I came home. Music played softly from her phone on the counter. Something low and jazz. Rain still tapped against the windows, gentler now. She glanced up when I entered. Did you get the milk? No hello. I held up the bag silently. Thanks, babe. The word landed strangely. Automatic affection. Muscle memory intimacy. Like pressing a pre-recorded button. I set the groceries down carefully. You cooked, wow, she said lightly, stirring pasta. You sound shocked, I almost said. I am. Instead I smiled faintly. You usually work late Tuesdays. Melissa canceled dinner. There was that name again. Melissa. Her co-worker. Recently divorced. Recently omnipresent. Emily talked about her constantly now. Their lunches. Their drinks after work. Their long phone calls. I tried not to resent it. But resentment grows best in silence. And I had become an expert gardener. I unpacked groceries while she cooked. Tiny domestic movement. The kind couples perform around each other without thought. Except now every movement felt strangely theatrical to me. Like we were reenacting a marriage rather than inhabiting one. She asked about work without listening closely to the answer. I asked about her day while watching her face more than her words. There were pauses between sentences that hadn't existed years ago. Not hostile pauses, just empty ones. Dead air neither of us knew how to bridge anymore. At dinner she checked her phone 3 times, not even hiding it. At one point she smiled at the screen. That same private smile from breakfast. Something inside me tightened. Melissa again, I asked. Emily looked up immediately. Too quickly. Yeah, what's so funny? Nothing. She took another bite. I watched her carefully. Can I see? The words came out before I could stop them. Silence. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But enough. Enough for both of us to feel something shift beneath the table. Emily's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not guilt. Annoyance. Why, I was just asking. She set the phone face down beside her plate. You're acting weird today. There it was again. Weird. A strange dog pacing in the corner of the room. I felt heat crawling slowly up my neck. I'm acting weird, yes, how? You're intense. The word hit harder than it should have. Intense. I looked down at my plate. Pasta steam drifted upward between us. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled softly through the city. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. I had started censoring emotional needs so aggressively over the years that even mild curiosity now registered as aggression. Sorry, I said automatically. Emily sighed softly, then immediately softened. Not because she understood, because she sensed discomfort. You know what I mean, she said. You've just been off lately. Not lonely lately. Not distant lately. Not hurting lately. Off. Like a machine malfunction. I nodded slowly. Yeah, she resumed eating. Conversation dissolved again. Forks scraping plate. Music murmuring from the counter. Rain. The refrigerator humming. And beneath all of it, pressure building invisibly inside my chest. I watched her twirl pasta around her fork and suddenly became aware of how badly I wanted her to notice me without being prompted. To look up and really see something was wrong. To ask twice to insist. But she didn't. Because I had trained her not to. Years of I'm fine, years of smoothing tension before it inconvenienced her. Years of emotional self-erasure disguised as patience. I helped build this version of us. That realization made resentment collapse inward into shame. After dinner, she left the plates for me unconsciously. Actually, unconsciously. That was the part that hurt most. No manipulation, no entitlement. Just certainty. She moved to the couch with her laptop, while I stood alone at the sink washing dishes in hot water that slowly reddened my hand. Behind me, she laughed quietly at something on her screen. I closed my eyes. For one brief, dangerous second, I imagined smashing a plate against the wall just to force reality to become undeniable. Not violent. Noise. Proof that I still existed loudly enough to disrupt the room. Instead, I rinsed another fork. Carefully. Quietly. Exactly the way she expected me to. Later that night, I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth while Emily scrolled in bed behind me. The mirror light was too bright. It emphasized the exhaustion under my eyes. Tiny lines near my mouth I didn't remember earning. I spat into the sink. Water rushed briefly. Then silence again. When I returned to the bedroom, Emily didn't look up. Blue phone light illuminated half her face in the dark. I slid into bed beside her. The mattress shifted. Nothing else did. What are you reading? I asked. What are you looking at? Just stuff. God. People say relationships collapse through betrayal or screaming or catastrophic moments. Sometimes they die through vocabulary erosion. Words shrinking smaller and smaller until entire emotional landscapes get replaced by stuff. I turned off my bedside lamp. Darkness swallowed most of the room except for the glow from her screen. Minutes passed. Maybe 20. I listened to her breathing. The tiny thumb movements against glass. The occasional soft exhale through her nose. And I felt increasingly invisible lying inches away from her. Finally, I said quietly, Emily, are you happy? That got her attention. She lowered the phone slowly. What kind of question is that? I don't know. Yes, you do. Her tone wasn't sharp, which somehow made this worse. Because now we were in dangerous territory neither of us wanted to name directly. I stared up at the ceiling. The fan rotated slowly overhead, casting soft, shifting shadows across the room. I just feel like. I stopped, she waited. I swallowed. Sometimes I feel like you don't really see me anymore. Silent. Heavy. Immediate. I could hear the rain again outside. Fainter now. Emily shifted slightly beside me. That's not true, but she answered too fast. Reflexively. The way people deny things before fully hearing them. I'm serious, I whispered. I know, am I wrong? Another pause. Then, you're being dramatic, there it was. Not cruel. Not explosive. Just minimizing enough to make me doubt my own emotional reality. I felt something inside me recoil. You asked, she continued softly. Things are just stressful lately. For who? For both of us. But you don't talk to me anymore. I'm talking to you now. That's not what I mean, Emily sighed. The sound carried exhaustion more than empathy. I don't know what you want me to say. The terrifying thing was, neither did I. Because no sentence could repair years of slow emotional starvation in one conversation. I turned my head toward her in the dark. Her face was barely visible now. Just outlined. You used to look at me differently, I said quietly. She went still. And immediately I regretted saying it because the sentence sounded desperate. Nostalgic in the ugliest way. Like begging someone to resurrect a dead version of themselves. People change, Daniel. The moment she said it, I felt cold spread through my stomach. People change. Such a reasonable sentence. Such a devastating one. Because hidden inside it was another sentence. Stop expecting what no longer exists. I stared at her. She picked her phone back up. Conversation over. Just like that. My chest began tightening harder now. Not panic. Not yet. But something dangerously close. You know what's weird? I said suddenly. Emily looked up again, annoyed this time. What? I think if I disappeared for a week, you'd mostly notice because things stopped getting done. Her face changed instantly. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I don't know. No, seriously. You'd miss the routines first. That's ridiculous, would it? Yes, but would you miss me first? She sat upright now. Why are you doing this? As though emotional exposure itself was aggression. I could feel my heartbeat climbing. I'm asking you a question, and I'm telling you this is insane. There it was. The subtle shift. The moment your pain becomes inconvenient enough that it starts sounding irrational to the other person. I laughed once under my breath. Not because anything was funny. Because something inside me was cracking. Emily stared at me now with genuine frustration. You've been acting strange all day, and now you're talking about disappearing. What do you want from me? I opened my mouth. Closed it. Because suddenly I understood with horrifying clarity. There was no answer she could give tonight that would make me feel loved again. Not quickly. Not cleanly. The damage wasn't one wound. It was accumulation. Thousands of unnoticed absences calcified over years. I don't know, I said finally. And for the first time in a long time, that was the complete truth. Emily shook her head softly and lay back down. You need sleep, then she turned away from me. Conversation over again. Her back facing me in the darkness felt unbearable tonight. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just closed. I lay there staring at the ceiling while the distance between our bodies expanded psychologically until it felt impossible to measure. And slowly, very slowly, the idea returned. Removal. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just absence. What would happen if I stopped offering myself to someone who no longer noticed receiving me? Question settled beside me in the dark like another person. And unlike my wife, it refused to leave. I didn't sleep. Or maybe I did in fragments too thin to qualify as rest. The night became a series of partial consciousnesses. The ceiling fan turning. Emily shifting once beside me. The distant groan of plumbing somewhere inside the building wall. Every sound felt amplified by the pressure inside my chest. At around 3 in the morning, I realized I was counting her breaths unconsciously. Not romantically. Compulsively. Like I needed proof she was still there, while simultaneously imagining what it would feel like if she woke up and I wasn't. I stared into the darkness until shapes began distorting. The dresser became a hunched figure in the corner. The hanging coat near the bathroom door looked briefly like someone standing motionless beside the bed. My mind felt swollen with exhaustion and hyper-awareness. Beside me, Emily slept facing away again. One arm tucked under the pillow, breathing slow, steady, stable. And I hated myself for resenting how peacefully she slept. Because somewhere inside me, a cruel thought kept whispering. Of course she sleeps peacefully. You're the one carrying the relationship alone. I rolled onto my back immediately, disgusted with myself. That wasn't fair. Was it? The terrifying thing was I no longer trusted my own perception. Everything felt emotionally warped. Every interaction stretched under microscopic examination. I kept replaying years of marriage, searching for evidence. Moments that proved she loved me. Moments that proved she didn't. My brain moved through memories like a prosecutor assembling contradictory cases simultaneously. Emily crying in my arms after her father's surgery. Emily forgetting my birthday dinner reservation because she stayed late at work. Emily kissing my forehead when I had the flu. Emily barely looking up when I spoke lately. Evidence. Counter-evidence. Love. Neglect. I couldn't separate them anymore. Somewhere near dawn, I slipped carefully out of bed. Emily didn't wake. I stood there for a second watching her. The pale blue early morning light softened her face. She looked younger asleep, less defended, less distant. And for one dangerous second, I almost climbed back into bed and buried this entire spiral inside myself forever. That was the old instinct. Preserve peace. Contain pain. Disappear quietly so the relationship survived. Something inside me had become too exhausted to continue functioning as emotional insulation. I left the bedroom. The apartment was cold. Gray dawn pressed against the windows like diluted ink. I stood in the kitchen barefoot, staring at the coffee machine without turning it on. Silence filled the apartment in layers. The refrigerator hummed. Traffic far below. Pipes ticking faintly in the walls. My own breath. Everything felt unreal in that exhausted hour. Like I was observing my life rather than living it. Then my eyes drifted toward the hallway closet, and the idea arrived fully formed. Not impulsive, not dramatic, calm, terrifyingly calm, live, not permanently, not theatrically, just enough. enough to remove myself from the machinery of her certainty, enough to find out whether my absence had emotional weight, or merely logistical consequences. The thought should have felt childish, manipulative. Instead, it felt like the first honest instinct I'd had in years. My chest tightened hard. I leaned both hands against the counter. This is insane. The sentence surfaced immediately, but another voice answered beneath it. Then why does it feel like breathing? I closed my eyes, and suddenly I became aware of how constantly tense my body had been for months. Jaw clenched during conversations, shoulders tight before coming home. That subtle anticipatory anxiety every time I entered a room with her, wondering which version of Emily existed that day, warm, distracted, irritable, absent. None of it catastrophic enough to justify collapse, which somehow made it worse. Death by emotional paper cut, tiny dismissals accumulating until your identity starts dissolving quietly around the edge. I opened the closet slowly. Suitcase, dark gray, still carrying the airline tag from our anniversary trip 8 months ago. Funny. I remembered almost nothing about that vacation, except pretending to enjoy it harder than I actually did. I stared at the suitcase for a long time before touching it. Then footsteps behind me. I froze. Emily stood in the hallway entrance wearing one of my old shirts, hair messy from sleep, eyes narrowed against the dim kitchen light. "What are you doing?" My throat tightened instantly. I looked at the suitcase, then at her. And in that moment I understood something horrible. Part of me had wanted to be caught, not consciously, but psychologically, because getting caught would force her to finally react, finally see the severity of what had been happening inside me. "I couldn't sleep," I said. Her eyes moved from my face back to the suitcase. Confusion spread slowly across her expression. What? Why is that out? Silence. Too long. I watched her wake up emotionally in real time. The shift was visible, a subtle sharpening behind the eyes. "Daniel," I swallowed. "I think I need some space." The words landed heavily between us. Emily blinked once, then laughed softly in disbelief. "What? I need a few days. A few days where? I don't know yet." Her face changed again. Now something closer to irritation. "You're serious?" "Yes, because of our conversation last night." "It's not just last night." "Oh my God." She rubbed her forehead immediately. Already overwhelmed. Already treating my pain like a developing inconvenience. "You can't just leave because we had an argument." "We didn't have an argument." "Yes, we did." "No," I said quietly. "I tried telling you I feel invisible." Her jaw tightened. "There it is again." "What?" "This dramatic language." Dramatic language. My chest hollowed. "Even now. Even here." I looked at her carefully. Really looked. And suddenly I realized she genuinely did not understand the scale of what was happening inside me. Not because she was evil, because I had hidden it too successfully for too long. I had trained her to believe my silence meant stability. Now the truth sounded theatrical because it contradicted years of performance. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said softly. "Then what are you doing?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, because the honest answer sounded unbearable, even inside my own head. "I need to know whether I exist emotionally when I'm no longer useful to you." Instead, I said, "I don't recognize myself anymore." That finally reached her. Not fully, but enough to make her expression flicker uncertainly. The irritation loosened slightly. She stepped closer. "You're scaring me." The sentence hit so hard I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because of the timing. Now, only now, when my disappearance became possible, I stared at her, and for one brief devastating moment, I wanted to collapse into her arms and let this entire thing dissolve. But underneath that desire was another feeling, a darker one, resentment, because fear had reached her faster than sadness ever did. "You haven't really looked at me in months," I whispered. Emily's face tightened immediately. "That's not true." "You stopped listening." "That's not true either. You talk to me like I'm infrastructure." "What does that even mean?" "It means I feel like part of your routine instead of your life." Silent. Her breathing changed slightly. "Faster now. You're blowing this out of proportion." There. Again. Always reducing. Always smoothing over. Always making my emotional reality slightly too large to be legitimate. I felt exhaustion spreading through my body like poison. "I think that's the problem," I said quietly. Every time I try to explain pain to you, you translate it into overreaction. Emily stared at me. And for the first time in years, I watched uncertainty enter her face when looking at me. Not annoyance, not dismissal, uncertainty. As though she was suddenly realizing there had been an entire interior collapse happening beside her, without her note. The realization seemed to disturb her. Good. The thought surfaced immediately and made me hate myself. Good. Because part of me wanted her disturbed now, wanted her destabilized, wanted her to feel even a fraction of the emotional disorientation I'd been drowning in for months. That recognition sickened me, love curdling slowly into the desire to be witnessed through damage. Emily crossed her arms tightly. So what? You're leaving for a few days. That's insane. Maybe you're really doing this. Yes, the apartment felt smaller suddenly. The walls closed, the air heavier. Emily stared at the suitcase again like it personally offended her. Then she said quietly, "You know what I think?" I waited. "I think you want me to beg you to stay." The sentence hit like a slap because somewhere deep down, some humiliating part of me probably did. Not for control, for proof. Proof that my emotional existence mattered enough to interrupt her certainty. I looked away from her. Rain had started again outside, thin streams sliding down the windows. The city beyond blurred and distorted. "I don't want to force care out of you," I whispered. "That's not what I said, it's what you meant." Emily's face hardened defensively. "You're twisting everything I say." "No," I said tiredly. "I've just spent too long translating what you don't say." Silent. Heavy. Dangerous. I could see anger beginning to mix with confusion inside her now. Because people become frightened when someone quietly dependable suddenly develops edges. The emotional ecosystem changes. The furniture starts speaking. "You know what?" she said finally. "Go then." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Cold. Immediate. A defensive strike launched before vulnerability could arrive. I nodded once slowly. There it is. Something inside me went strangely calm after that. Not relief. More like emotional blood loss. I reached for the suitcase. Emily watched me carefully now. Waiting. Maybe expecting me to stop. Maybe expecting herself to stop me. Neither happened. I walked into the bedroom. Opened drawers. Pulled clothes mechanically into the suitcase. Every movement felt detached from reality. Emily remained in the kitchen. I could hear nothing now except the muted sound of rain and the zipper opening and closing. Shards, Jillian's toothbrush, phone charger. Tiny objects from a shared life suddenly transformed into evidence of separation. My hands started shaking while folding a sweater. I stopped moving. The bedroom looked different already. Threatening. Like a place I no longer belonged. Half the closet emptying exposed spaces I hadn't noticed before. Gap. Absences. I suddenly imagined Emily sleeping here tonight alone. Would she cry? Would she call Melissa first? Would she feel abandoned or interrupted? The fact I still needed to know nearly destroyed me. Behind me, Emily appeared silently in the doorway. I sensed her before seeing her. "You're seriously doing this?" Her voice sounded smaller now. Less angry. I kept folding. Because if I looked at her too long, I might collapse emotionally. "I don't know how else to make this real." "What does that mean?" "It means I've been disappearing slowly in front of you for years." "That's not fair." "Maybe not. You think I don't care about you." I finally looked up. And there it was. Something raw behind her eyes now. Not polished irritation. Not defensive annoyance. Actual hurt. But even then, part of me noticed with quiet devastation that it had taken physical departure to reach this point. I swallowed hard. "I think you stopped noticing me." Emily stared at me. Long enough for silence to become unbearable. Then she said quietly, "You stopped talking." The sentence froze me completely. Because suddenly memories started rearranging themselves. Me saying "it's fine" repeatedly. Me withdrawing after dismissive conversation. Me numbing myself instead of risking conflict. Me choosing emotional invisibility because it felt safer than disappointment. Emily stepped farther into the room. "You think I didn't notice you changing?" I said nothing. "You stopped laughing with me." My chest tightened violently. "You stopped touching me first." Another tightening. "You stopped telling me things." Each sentence landed like discovering hidden fractures beneath a house you thought only had surface damage. Emily's voice trembled slightly now. But you did it so quietly, I stared at her. Completely still. Because suddenly the entire emotional landscape shifted beneath my feet. Not enough to erase her neglect, but enough to complicate it. Which was worse. Far worse. Simple villains are emotionally survivable. Mutual erosion is not. I got tired, I whispered. I did too, silence again. Rain against the glass. My suitcase half packed on the bed between us like an open wound. Emily looked exhausted suddenly. Not performatively. Deeply. Kind of exhaustion that comes from years of emotional miscommunication, hardening into structure. I didn't know how to reach you anymore, she said softly. I laughed once under my breath. Broken. Funny what, that's exactly how I felt. Neither of us moved. And in that stillness, something terrible became clear. We had both been lonely beside each other for much longer than either of us realized. Not equally. Not identically. But genuinely. The realization should have comforted me. Instead, it made everything hurt more. Because now there was no clean narrative left. No singular neglect. No simple victimhood. Just two people slowly failing to find each other inside accumulated silence. Emily looked at the suitcase again. Then back at me. Are you still leaving? The question sounded fragile now. And dangerously hopeful. I closed my eyes briefly. Inside me, contradictory emotions collided so violently, it became difficult to breathe. Part of me wanted to stay. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me wanted her to finally fight for me. Part of me no longer trusted the authenticity of any reaction produced under threat of abandonment. Because that was the real horror now. Even if she begged, would it be love or panic? Could I still tell the difference? I opened my eyes. I don't know, Emily's expression cracked slightly at that answer. Not because it was cruel, because it was honest. For the first time in years, I genuinely didn't know what direction my own life was moving. My identity had become too fused with emotional suppression, too dependent on being needed quietly. And now that structure was collapsing. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped beneath my weight. Emily remained standing. Distance still existed between us physically, but now it felt charged differently. Not absent. Instability. Neither of us understood the other anymore. Maybe we never had as completely as we believed. I kept waiting for you to notice, I said quietly. Emily's eyes glistened faintly. I thought you wanted space. I wanted effort. I thought pressuring you would push you farther away. I was already far away. The room felt airless. Every sentence exposed another layer beneath years of ordinary routine. And underneath all of it existed something deeply frightening. Neither of us could identify the exact moment love became maintenance. Emily sat beside me carefully now. Not touching. Close enough for warmth. Far enough for uncertainty. I don't want you to go, she whispered. My throat tightened immediately. There it is. The sentence I'd wanted. I did. Imagine. But instead of relief, I felt grief. Because it arrived too late to feel simple. I stared at the floor. I don't know if you want me, I admitted quietly. Or just don't want the change. Emily inhaled sharply at that, and didn't answer immediately. That silence said more than words could have. Because she didn't know. Not fully. Not instantly. The honesty of that uncertainty devastated both of us simultaneously. I could feel it. Two people sitting inches apart realizing they had drifted so gradually into emotional distortion that even love itself no longer felt fully trustworthy. Emily finally touched my arm. Softly. Contact nearly broke me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it felt unfamiliar. I closed my eyes, and immediately tears burned behind them. Not explosive tears. Worse. Silent ones. Kind born from prolonged emotional starvation. I'm so tired, I whispered. Emily's hand tightened slightly around my arm. And for a moment neither of us moved. Rain continued outside. The apartment remained dim and gray. The suitcase sat open beside us, half plugged, half abandoned, like the marriage itself. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the grief and confusion and exhaustion, another realization unfolded slowly. Even if I stayed, something fundamental had already broken. Not love. Something harder to repair. Certainty. The unquestioned belief that we were emotionally safe inside each other. Now every silence would carry memory. Every distracted glance would reopen suspicion. Every moment of distance would feel dangerous. I understood suddenly that psychological fractures do not heal cleanly once fully seen. Awareness changes the architecture permanently. Emily leaned her forehead against my shoulder carefully, tentatively, like approaching an injured animal, and I sat completely still while staring at the rain beyond the bedroom window, neither leaving nor staying, just suspended there together inside the wreckage of two slowly disappearing people, finally seeing each other clearly enough to understand how much had already been lost.